Throughout the years, wooden roller coasters have come a long way, but with all the major modern steel coasters being added around the world, in some ways, woodies are being surpassed. In this video, we'll delve into the history of the wooden roller coaster and see how it's developed in the last 150 plus years. Then we'll look at the status of wooden roller coasters in today's theme park industry, and we'll decide if wooden coasters are still relevant in 2025. The roots of wooden coasters can be traced all the way back to the 16th century. In Russia, this is when you started seeing wood-framed ice slides popping up, taking sledders down 70-foot slopes. This was the beginning ideas for what became the wooden roller coaster. According to the Roller Coaster Database, the oldest recorded wood coaster opened in 1843, roots abandoned at Tivoli Gardens, the original one. In 1884, Lamarcus A. Thompson designed the Gravity Switchback Railway, and this made its debut at the very famous Coney Island in New York. This attraction became wildly popular and successful. The coaster brought in $600 of profit a day. For context, in today's money, that's $19,000 a day. The success of this ride led to many more additions across the country and across the world. Then in the 1870s and 1880s, there were a whole bunch of patents that were filed to improve the design. 1872, John G. Taylor introduced the improvement of the inclined railway. 1884, Alanson Wood introduced the circular railway. 1885, Lamarcus A. Thompson introduced the switchback railway. 1885, Charles D. Kramer introduced the inclined railway. 1885, Joseph P. Urich introduced the gravity railroad. Also in 1885, Charles Alcock introduced the serpentine railway. As you can see, there was a lot of things going on here in 1885 specifically in regard to coaster patents. Technology continued to progress, and rides like the Gentle Figure 8 and the Scenic Railway became more popular. Leap the Dips opened in 1902, and while it has been SB&O since last year, this coaster serves as a window into the past. Pretty wild to think that this was probably a top-of-the-line coaster back in 1902. This side friction coaster is not impressive from a statistics standpoint, with 1,400 feet of track, a top height of 41 feet, a top drop of just 9 feet, and not a very high top speed. But it's a piece of history, and for that, it's very much appreciated, and hopefully they can get it back open. Coasters like this really give you an insight into what the coaster world was like 120 years ago, which is absolutely wild to think about. Now, let's go through the decades and talk about some notable coasters that were added. In the 1910s, a notable coaster was Roots Abandoned, the newer one, at Tivoli Gardens. This opened in 1914. You can still ride this coaster today, brakeman and all. Another sweet piece of history, and this shows that wooden coasters were starting to grow in size by this point, and by the 1920s, we entered into what was kind of a golden age for wooden roller coasters. In 1924, the Santa Cruz Beach Boardwalk added Giant Dipper. I've actually had the opportunity to ride this coaster, and it's still running strong 100 years later. It might be a tad bumpy at points, but it's got some good laterals on the turns and a couple good airtime moments in the second half, and at night, it's even better. In 1927, the famous Coney Island Cyclone opened. This has been such an important roller coaster for the theme park industry. It has been cloned a bunch of times, and the ride itself is still running very well. I would make the argument that few roller coasters have had as great of an impact as this one has. In the 1920s, Kennywood added 4 different wooden coasters: Racer, Jackrabbit, and Thunderbolt. All of these coasters still operate at Kennywood to this very day. As you probably noticed, the wooden coasters by the 1920s were starting to resemble more of what we're used to today. Skipping ahead to the 40s, 50s, and 60s, this period of time saw a decline in roller coaster investment all around the world. Even in this time though, we still saw some very awesome wooden coasters open, and some notable attractions indeed. In the 40s, we saw Comet at Hershey Park. This ride opened in 1946. A year later, Playland Park would add Rocket. This coaster has since been relocated to Knoebels, and we know it as Phoenix, the award-winning coaster. In 1958, Playland added Coaster up in British Columbia, and this ride is said to have some absolutely wild airtime moments. In 1966, Family Kingdom Amusement Park opened Swamp Fox. This was a pretty decent sized ride with a top speed of 50 miles an hour and 2,600 feet of track. As mentioned, the 40s, 50s, and 60s had less investment into the theme park world than maybe seen previously, but starting in the 70s, it ramped back up. A major contributor to this was the Racer that opened at Kings Island in 1972. This coaster was very successful, and it led to the addition of many more wooden coasters because of it. Racer features 2 mirrored layouts with 3,400 feet of track on each, and a top height of 88 feet and a speed of 53 miles an hour. This was a very important coaster for its time period. Later in that same decade, Kings Island opened one of the most ambitious coasters ever built, and that is of course the Beast. This opened in 1979, was built in-house, and designed by Charles Dinn. This coaster features 7,300 feet of track. In the 90s, the Twister layout started to become more popular, in particular with the introduction of Great Coasters International. During this time, there was also a focus on restoring old wooden roller coasters, which is always great to see. The 21st century has seen wooden coasters get bigger than ever. Examples include Gravity Group's first 2 roller coasters. Hades 360 at Mount Olympus is a pretty crazy attraction, going out of the park and under the parking lot. And then Voyage at Holiday World is one of the craziest coasters ever built. The fact that these were the first 2 coasters built by a company is pretty wild to think about. But recently, in the theme park world, we've seen a focus on family wooden coasters. The Gravity Group in particular has really transitioned to building mostly family-style roller coasters. Now they still have their thrill rides, but this is the model that seems to be selling more often than not. GCI has also jumped into the intermediate wood coasters game a little bit, with some of their newer coasters like Zambezi Ziner. This is an interesting trend to follow in the development of wood coasters. And it's just a fact that when you look back in the last 30 years, there have been less wooden coasters built each year and more steel coasters. Let's look at the numbers. 1994, 7 wood, 59 steel. 2004, 5 wood, 129 steel. 2014, 3 wood, 296 steel. And 2024, 3 wood, 239 steel. When you look at the last 10 years, there's a similar downtrend. From 2015 to 2018, we actually got a decent amount of wooden coasters, but 2019 on, it has been far less, and I think COVID definitely impacted that. But that's clearly not the only reason, considering this trend has been going for the last 30 years. Here's another interesting metric. Let's look at the major manufacturers that contribute to the wooden coaster market. On the top line, you'll see companies that are completely defunct. Custom Coasters International, the Dinn Corporation, Philadelphia Toboggan Coasters, and the Roller Coaster Corporation of America. On the second line, you see companies that are still operating, but they only build steel coasters. Intamin Amusement Rides, Rocky Mountain Construction, S&S Worldwide, and Vekoma. All of these companies tried their hand in wooden coasters, but no longer build any. That leaves 2 major manufacturers that still build wooden coasters, and that of course is Great Coasters International and the Gravity Group. There are a lot more companies that are defunct or no longer build wood coasters than there are companies that still do it. This means a couple different things. 1. Companies are starting to realize that there's more potential in the steel coaster market. After all, wooden coasters are expensive to upkeep and maintain, and there's a lot more potential with the steel coasters because there are so many different more model types that you can do. Intamin and RMC have built some phenomenal wooden coasters, but you don't see them popping up anymore. 2. In a lot of ways, GCI and the Gravity Group have the corner on the market when it comes to wooden coasters. There's a darn good chance that if a park needs a wooden coaster, they're going to call one of these 2 companies because they do an excellent job most of the time. Yes, they do a good job, but the demand has definitely gone down. So, it leads me to this question. Are wooden roller coasters still relevant? I think it's a yes and no answer. Yes, they're still relevant in terms of theme park history. Not only do theme park historians love classic wooden coasters, but I think just about every coaster enthusiast does as well, myself included. It's pretty incredible to get the opportunity to ride something that, in some cases, was literally built over 100 years ago. I think we ought to cherish these attractions for the history that they are, and some of them are still really good rides. To any parks with a classic wooden coaster that might be listening, please do everything you can to maintain it and maintain it well. No, wooden coasters are not relevant in the sense that they will never take over steel coasters again, and they will never be more popular than steel coasters. At least that's my opinion, judging based off the evidence. As I alluded to, there's just more you can do with a steel coaster. For example, you can have a 4th dimension coaster, whether that's something small like an S&S Freespin or something more legit like X2. Or you can't have a flying wooden coaster, so there's definitely limitations. That said, for the most part, I think the quality of the wooden coasters that we're seeing is better than it's ever been, and the layouts are getting more and more interesting and more dynamic. And yes, they are relevant in the sense that there will always be a park that could use a wooden coaster, though that number is going down every year. So while they're far from the only option in 2025, I do think that wooden coasters are still relevant and that they still have their place. In a lot of ways, we wouldn't have the steel coasters we have today if it wasn't for the wood coasters that came before, so we really should appreciate them for that. And so, the conclusion at the end of the day is ultimately, yes and no. but more so yes. So, what do you think about this topic? Let me know down in the comment section below. Do you think wooden coasters are still relevant, or do you think they've been outclassed? If you enjoyed this video, I'd appreciate it if you gave this video a like and considered subscribing down below. It'll be interesting to see what the next couple years bring in regard to wooden coasters, and maybe in the future we'll rehash this conversation. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.